We've all purchased it, and we've all regretted it. Cheap furniture from the big box stores. Particle board garbage that's been veneered over to look like real wood. And they may have even fooled us into thinking that it is real wood. But it's just a facade. It's a lie to sell cheap materials at higher profit margins. All veneered furniture is poorly and cheaply made. Right? So, if I am going to be so bold as to claim that all veneered furniture is bad, I should probably answer a few questions first, such as, what is veneer and how is it made? So, very simply, veneer is just thinly sliced wood. Yes, there are plastic veneers and there are other materials but it's all the same thing. It's just a very thinly sliced material that's being glued to something thicker in order to give the appearance of something else. Veneer in the woodworking world is real wood. And that's an important thing to note because people think that it's a fake, people think that it's a lie, and there are printed versions of wood veneers out there. But for the woodworkers amongst us who are making objects out of wood, when we use veneers, they are very much real wood that has just been sliced very thinly in order to yield more out of the tree. Now, there are a bunch of different ways they go about slicing up the tree to get different patterns out of it. The first is what's called the rotary cut. So basically they take a tree and they put it on two ends like a piece of corn on the cob and they just rotate it on a giant lathe and they peel the veneer off the tree. That gives a very unique pattern, and this is the pattern you're going to see on all construction grade material. So anything that has kind of those wild swirly circular patterns, that's all rotary cut. Nothing wrong with that. It yields the most out of the tree, and it's the easiest way to make those cuts. Make those large continuous sheets of wood out of a single tree. Now, the other way they make veneers is by just simply taking the tree, lifting it up onto a knife, and dropping it down so you get all of these sheets of veneer that are sequentially cut. Exactly the same as how they mill a tree in a normal sawmill with a chainsaw mill or a bandsaw mill. It's the exact same process. They're just slicing the fibers out of the tree rather than cutting the fibers out. So you're not losing the kerf every time you make a cut, and you just yield a lot more. All right, let's talk briefly about how veneers are shipped and stored, because they are just pieces of wood that are skinny enough to be rolled up and shipped in a box, which is great. But if you're about to make a cabinet, like I am, and it's going to take you a number of weeks or months, like it always takes me, you have to store your veneers flat. Otherwise, they're going to end up taking that curly shape that they're rolled up and shipped in. So you either have to find space to store them flat, or create space so that they remain workable long term. So now you know where veneer comes from, but how do we use it? Now, I want to be mindful not to tell you guys 37 times in this video that veneer is real wood, but when we're talking about how you process veneers, that is an important thing to keep in mind. Because essentially what you're going to do is you're going to take it out of the box, you're going to let it sit flat and adjust to the environment the same way you do with regular lumber in your shop. Then you're going to set it on your bench. You're going to figure out how much square footage you need for each component and think about your grain orientation. You're going to cut it with a saw. You're going to edge it with a hand plane. You're going to do all of the things. It's real woodworking, but it's just skinnier pieces of wood. So with that out of the way, I do want to talk about substrates, because I think
I think this is the reason why people think that veneered furniture is kind of lesser than. They think that you're taking a real piece of wood or a prettier face veneer and gluing it down to something that's lesser than, that's cheap, that's filler material. And that's not an unfair critique. I mean, that's kind of the IKEA way, right? Like you take a thing that looks quasi nice or is just plastic and you glue it onto cardboard or pressboard or chipboard. That is what's done in the industry, but we're not talking about industrial scale furniture right now. We're talking about furniture shops, we're talking about one-offs, we're talking about small runs, individual makers. And what we tend to use is high quality substrates. We're talking about Baltic birch, which in fairness, guys, Baltic birch these days is often more expensive than the veneers themselves. So it's certainly not cheap, if anything else. But you can buy things like MDF or HDF, that's medium density fiberboard or high density fiberboard. You can even veneer over solid wood. This is a thing that has been done for hundreds and thousands of years, guys. We have veneered furniture in Roman historical artifact. I'm not a historian. I don't know what the right words are, but you know what I'm trying to say. There is evidence of veneered furniture that is multiple thousands of years old. So it's not a new thing. It's not a cheap thing that was invented by the Industrial Revolution. It's just taking a piece of wood and gluing it down to another piece of wood. And the reason we use things like plywood or MDF these days as substrates is because they're dimensionally stable. And we'll get into that momentarily, but in short, that allows us to do things that we couldn't do if we were veneering over solid wood.
But we still have to answer the question of why would we choose to use veneers in the first place? Well, there are three main reasons: expense, stability, and decoration. Let's start with expense.
Now, I've already mentioned that substrates can get quite expensive, and the truth is, veneers can get pretty pricey as well. So, if I'm talking about cost, what do I actually mean? If the purchasing of the materials plus the time invested in the project to process the veneers, stitch the veneers, glue the veneers, if all of that adds up, what do I mean by cost as a reason we veneer? Well, just to give you some cold, hard numbers, I was curious. I went and did a little bit of math, and to make this project out of solid wood, it would be around 70 board feet. So for the sake of this conversation, let's assume no error. I usually build in 10 to 20% error, so I'm over about 10 to 20% on the board footage, but let's just keep it easy and we'll call it 70 board feet. If I were to make this piece out of oak, which, looking at the local folks that I tend to buy from, it seems to average to about $10.50 a board foot. That's $735 for the material alone to build this cabinet. Now, if I were to do the exact same thing out of veneer, to build this entire cabinet out of flat sawn white oak veneer, I would need about 150 square feet. And checking with my distributor, that runs about $2 a square foot. So great, $300. But then I also need to purchase my substrates, and I, on this project, spent $454 on the substrates alone. So now we're at $754. So we can see it's not necessarily cheaper to veneer a piece than it is to make it out of solid. In fact, in this case, it's a little bit more expensive. So what is the cost I'm talking about? What is the point of going through the process of veneering from a cost perspective? Well, I didn't use white oak veneer on this project, as you can probably tell. And listen, I'm not trying to yuck anybody's yum. If you love white oak and you want to veneer acres of it, by all means, it's very popular in architectural and interior design worlds. But if I'm going to go through the hassle of veneering a piece, I'm probably going to want to play with a material I can't get in solid form. And on this project, I used a curly Australian blackwood and a figured Kalo birch. Now, I've never even heard of Kalo birch before this project. I don't think you can get it in solid. I think it only comes in veneer form, but you can get blackwood. So let's focus on that for a moment. Looking at my distributors, that seems to run between $35 and $60 a board foot. So let's be conservative and call it $40 a board foot. At 70 board feet for this project, that's $2,800 for the material alone.
Oh, God.
So if you're talking about figured or exotic woods, veneers start to make a little bit more sense from a cost-saving perspective.
You know, here's a fun fact about me. I, sometimes, when I get in the flow of the workday, just forget to eat. Always been that way. Hyperfixation, I think the kids call it these days. And you know what else I forget to do often is stay hydrated.
Water would be nice.
Which is why I'm so glad that the sponsor of today's video is Element. Element is a zero-sugar electrolyte drink mix born from the growing body of research revealing that optimal health outcomes occur at sodium levels 2 to 3 times the government recommendations. Each stick pack delivers a meaningful dose of electrolytes free of sugar, artificial colors, and other dodgy ingredients. Dodgy? Who says dodgy? When did I become British?
I don't actually know.
Look, I'll be completely honest with you. The first time I was introduced to Element was at a woodworking conference, and if you've ever been to a woodworking conference, you might know that we, as a people, tend to enjoy our whiskey. And the following morning, my sweet, sweet angel of a friend, Lindsay, handed me an Element stick pack, and thankfully, I was right as rain in short order. And ever since that day, and this is 100% true, I always keep a box of Element in the house. Because sometimes I'm in the shop for 10 hours and I forget to drink water. And sometimes I may have a beverage or four with a dear friend and only remember the following morning that I am, in fact, in my late 30s. Thankfully, it's nothing a stick pack and a strong cup of coffee can't fix. So if you want to support my channel by engaging with my sponsors and get a free Element sample pack with any purchase, head to element.com/Encurtis or use my link in the description. The sample pack has one of every flavor, so you can try them all out and pick your favorite. Plus, if you don't like any of them, it's risk-free. Give it away to a severely dehydrated friend, and Element will give you your money back. No questions asked. That's drinklmnt.com/Encurtis or use the link below. And thanks to Element for sponsoring this week's video. So now that we've got our face veneer glued onto our substrate, in this case either plywood or MDF, now we can treat it as though it's a finished panel, which means it's time to cut some joinery. Now our cabinet is all joined up and it's looking quite good, so we can focus on the second reason why we would choose to use veneers: stability.
Now, call me a modernist, call me an anti-traditionalist if those are different things. Call me whatever you like, but the truth is, I don't love a frame and panel. At least not at this point in my career. I've made many of them. They absolutely have their place. And again, I'm not trying to dunk on anybody's preferences out here. But if I'm going to design a piece and execute it, I'm probably going to try to do something I haven't done before, most often. And I've made a lot of frame and panels. Now, these doors that I'm making are roughly 22 inches wide. So if I were to make them using solid wood, the expansion rate on maple or Kalo birch, which I don't know, but let's just call it maple, it's gonna be about a 1/2 inch per door. So I'm going to have to use a frame and panel technique in order to make sure that these doors don't swell and shut or buckle and press against each other and blow the cabinet out. There's a lot of different variables that I need to account for when using solid wood. So using veneer allows me to create a dimensionally stable door, which means that I have more options as far as the design and aesthetics of this cabinet goes. Now, the reason that they are dimensionally stable is because the substrate is dimensionally stable. We're talking about plywood, we're talking about MDF, etc., whatever you choose to use for that internal core. Now, I used MDF for this because I wanted to have the extra weight of the MDF, so it felt substantial, it felt sturdy, but there are other considerations with MDF. For example, I need to be able to hinge this piece. So you see I have a really thick edging on that MDF. So if you want to avoid going through that step, you can just use a plywood core. Or if you really want to use solid, you can apply the same principles to a solid core by creating something called lumber core, which is essentially a bunch of tiny little strips of poplar that all have micro gaps between them to allow them to expand and contract. So it's taking the exact same principle, laminating up a bunch of quote unquote real wood, and creating a core that is dimensionally stable to give you more options as far as the design aesthetics go, and not have to create a frame and panel.
Okay, I really need to get cranking on this cabinet and get it finished. So while I'm doing that, let's talk about the third and final reason why it might be a really good choice to use veneer, which is surface decoration.
Okay, what do I mean by surface decoration? There's certainly the argument to be made for marquetry and parquetry, which are art forms in and of themselves. Those are taking two-dimensional images and making them out of nothing but raw wood materials. That's an incredible skill set that I wish I had, but I don't. And maybe I'll develop it sometime in the future. Maybe that is a road I'll go down. But at this moment in time, I certainly do not have that capacity. What I mean by surface decoration is the ability to create grain orientations that would be physically impossible with solid wood due to wood movement. And we'll dive more into that, but real quick, let's talk about how I'm gluing this thing up.
We're buttering the edge as well as the rabbet.
Yeah, I'm more concerned about buttering the rabbet,
Sure.
just because that's easier to access.
Sure. So that's even better. So then I can focus my energy on getting it in the holes.
Yes.
Okay. Don't hit him too hard with a mallet. Ask me how I know that.
Have you really hit them that hard?
My students have.
Hey Siri, can you set a timer for 20 minutes, please?
Oh, you're so polite to Siri.
Well,
That's
I don't,
nice.
I don't want it to come back at me when the AI revolution happens.
Sure. I mean, realistically, if there's some sort of apocalypse situation, we're gonna need the robots on our side.
100%.
If it's like aliens or something.
100%.
Yeah. Unless it's the robots that are doing the attacking, in which case.
Guys, we haven't even started drinking yet.
That's so true. I'd argue our sober conversations are more.
Or almost better.
Yeah.
They're definitely more publishable.
Honestly, guys, get yourself a shopmate that's willing to help you glue up complicated carcasses, because it makes life a lot easier. But anyway, decorative surfaces and veneers. Let's just take a classic example of the demi-lune, where you have a radial pattern of wood emanating out from a center point. You can't do that in solid wood because of expansion and contraction issues. So laying that up in veneer, even if it's veneered over poplar, is the only way to make that happen.
Hell
Nothing's upside down.
Nothing is upside down. Nothing is out of order. Everything is flush. I love it when things work.
So successful glue ups out of the way, and our 3 reasons why people might choose to use veneer behind us, I want to talk briefly about concept, because The question you might be asking is, this is all cool and good and well, but what's the point? Why not just make a big plywood box? Why not buy pre-veneered plywood to make life easier? And those are absolutely options, but this is a commission and it's going down to Florida. And so I wanted to find a material that had kind of some essence of Florida in it. And it didn't have to be veneer, but once I stumbled upon this Kalo birch, I realized it feels sandy in some way. It's got those little bark inclusions in it. It's really warm. It feels sunny. So it felt like a material that belonged in Florida, like some kind of nod to the region. And so immediately I knew that that's what I was going to use. And then I set about trying to find a contrasting material that played really nicely with it, but didn't overpower it. And that's how I ended up finding that Australian blackwood. And then I have the splay of the doors, the parting of the doors, if you will. And that's, I don't think, necessary for the concept of being in Florida. But what I do think it does successfully is it intrigues people. It invites them to look deeper. It creates a layer of depth that then they want to go and interact with the cabinet. They want to interact with the door, see what's behind it, see how that contrast between that Kalo and that Australian blackwood is, like, what it's all doing together. And that layer of intrigue, I think, is really important for a piece of furniture. It asks you, it invites you to find out what's inside. Now let's bring this thing home, shall we?
So there it is, friends. She is done. She's got to go down to Florida in about a week and a half. So I'm going to crate this thing up and drive it down, which is going to be an adventure in and of itself. And I think I'm going to make a video about it. So if you want to see that video, do comment down below. But she's done. She looks good. I feel very, very good about where it ended up going. And luckily, I talked to the client the other day, and they're thrilled with it too. So I'm excited to see it in its final resting place in context. And other than that, I haven't edited this video yet, obviously. I don't know how long this one's going to be. It feels like it's probably going to be a long boy. But I hope the point that I was trying to get across is fair and understandable, which is, yes, cheap things are veneered and solid wood is desirable for a reason. It has repairability, it has longevity, and it has a certain feel to it that I don't think you can encapsulate in a veneered piece. But you can do things with veneers that you can't do with solid wood. And they are, as a vehicle for a creative person, a really important avenue to unlock. I don't quite know how to say that, but you know what I'm trying to get at. I think if you are afraid of veneers or if you view them as lesser than, you are stifling yourself creatively, because I couldn't build this cabinet without using veneers, not with this material and not these doors the way they exist as is. That's an impossibility to do with solid wood. So I hope that all makes sense. I hope it was valuable. And if nothing else, I hope it was fun to kind of watch the overview of this build, because I've been working on it for 3-4 months now. And I know you guys were excited to see it done. So I'm going to end it there. I'm going to get out of here. Please make sure, if you want to support this channel, you can check out the Patreon, where you can get these videos ad-free before they come out on YouTube. You can also support this channel by purchasing merch down in the links below. And don't forget to check out the podcast I do, Woodworking is Bull, where we talk about all things design, craft, and a bunch of random other things. So, friends, thanks for watching this one, and I will see y'all in the next one. Cheers.